Hello, I'm Andy, tea trainer at Teapigs HQ, and welcome to Teapigs Tea School. Let's introduce the basics of how we get from the bush to the brew. Comes as a surprise to many students at tea school that all true tea comes from one impressive plant, Camellia sinensis, or the tea bush to you and I. Now there's lots of varieties of Camellia sinensis. Some count well over 1,500, and this is much like there being different types of grape that make different types of wine. The main two being Camellia sinensis, mainly used for making green teas, and Camellia sinensis asanica, mostly used for these punchier black teas. And each variant will produce slightly different leaves. Likewise, location, climate, altitude will all make a difference in what a tea leaf can taste like. However, once you've picked your leaves, it's the process they go through which will make them one of the, broadly speaking, four main types of teas. And these four types are white, green, oolong and black teas. Now within these you've got the brews that you may know. Matcha, sencha, these are variants of green teas. Darjeeling and Assam are variants of the black tea process. And for us Brits, it's important to point out that our beloved English breakfast will be a blend of black teas. So when you're picking tea from the tea bush, the best quality comes from the top two leaves and the bud. This is a very iconic image in the tea growing world. You can pick leaves lower down the bush, but they'll be a bit older and a bit harsher tasting. The freshest, juiciest and most delicious tasting teas come from these top two leaves and a bud. Now, there are two methods as to how you can pick tea. The first is the orthodox method. This is where the stages are all done by hand. As you can imagine, this means more people power, which makes it more expensive, but it does act as a quality control. And because we pay a premium to only select the best teas, we will always choose the orthodox method. The other approach is the CTC method, which stands for cut, tear, curl. And this uses machinery to replicate some of the stages of tea production. It is quicker, but it can be a little less accurate. And one last thing to touch on is caffeine. Any true tea, that is anything that comes from the good old Camellia sinensis, will contain caffeine. In fact, pound for pound, tea leaves contain more caffeine than coffee. But you use much less tea to make a cuppa, so the overall caffeine content in a cup of tea is less than a cup of freshly brewed coffee. But what if you like to drink cups and cups of yumminess but want less of the caffeine? Well, we've still got you covered. First stop, decaf. The Teapigs decaffeinated English breakfast is a relatively new tea to our offering, and that's because up until recently the decaffeination process hasn't produced teas good enough to meet our really high standards. Normally, to try and decaffeinate something, you'd either have to double or triple brew the tea or coffee to try and strip the product of the caffeine, and this just leaves a sad tasting cuppa. Or you can chemically intervene, but we didn't want to offer a tea that had been bubbled with bleach. Then along came the CO2 method to save the day. For our decaf, we take 100% black tea and using CO2 and some extra sciencey magic, it strips and removes the caffeine while still leaving you a flavoursome cuppa. Phew. Rooibos is an awesome cuppa if you want a naturally caffeine-free black tea alternative. Sometimes called red bush, rooibos literally meaning red bush in Afrikaans. It's a South African shrub which you can treat like an English breakfast by adding a splash of milk, but its benefit is it never had any caffeine in it in the first place. But if you don't want to add milk, you can just enjoy it for its earthy, sweet deliciousness. And you can obviously also leap into the world of herbals. Anything that doesn't come from the tea bush isn't technically a tea. So herbal teas, like peppermint or superfruit, which are made from dried herbs and fruits, aren't really teas at all, but herbal infusions or tisanes. And this means generally they don't contain caffeine, although you might have heard of brews like yerba mate, a South American favourite, which gives you a caffeine boost, but is not a variety of Camellia sinensis. But how do you actually get those four main types of tea, of which I was talking about earlier? I hear you cry. Well, thanks for asking. Once you have got your tea bush and you pluck or pick the leaf, then these leaves will be withered or air dried. And that is how you get the first type of tea, which is white tea. Now you can pick tea from the tea bush roughly from the same time of year that you would mow your lawn in Britain. That is from early spring to late autumn. White tea has a very particular window in which it can be picked. So when the tea bush wakes up from its sort of hibernation over winter, That first bud that appears on the Camellia sinensis is what you want. That bud is very, very precious. And in fact, if you opened up a white tea needle or tip, as they're sometimes called, you would see those 2 leaves and the bud inside there. The other types of tea then go through something called the rolling process. And this is very similar to if you were in a cocktail bar and ordered something like a mojito and the bartender muddles the mint when they bash it around and getting all the juices and the enzymes flowing. Essentially, you are bruising the leaf to get this lovely chemical reaction going. And this is what they do by rolling the tea leaves. For green tea, the next tea along, once it's been rolled, you do not want that rolled leaf to start reacting with the oxygen in the air. You do not want it to ferment or oxidize. So for green tea, what you will do is take your tea leaf and put that in either basically a big wok or a big vat to steam it or seal it. And that is keeping in all that yummy, fresh goodness. So green tea is a non-fermented type of tea. Oolongs will be allowed to ferment for a short period of time. This means they've still got the light, fresh taste of some green teas, a little bit more of a body, which is a bit more similar to a black tea. And then black teas are allowed to fully ferment. They might be left in the sun to bake for hours on end, so they are really strong and punchy. This will also change the colour of the leaf. It will make it also a little bit smaller because all the moisture has been removed. So a black tea is a lot more strong in flavour and also smaller in leaf. Think of it a bit like an apple. If you bite into an apple and look at the flesh, it's white, it's crisp, it's juicy. That is like drinking your white tea. However, if you've bitten into an apple and leave it on the side for a few hours, what happens to the flesh? It turns brown. The oxygen reacts with it to not only change the colour, but then, if you were to taste it, the flavour becomes that more of a dried fruit, which is then more similar to your punchy black teas. That is what's happening with your tea. So white tea, light, crisp, fresh, and black tea on the other end of the scale, a lot punchier with a lot more wallop. If you are looking to drink tea for the health benefits, white teas have the most antioxidants. However, if you're looking for a lift, black tea has the most caffeine. So if you look at the scale of white to black teas, white tea has the most antioxidants and health benefits, whereas black teas give you more of a lift. So now you know all about the different teas and infusions that you can enjoy from the Teapigs range. For more tips and tricks, check out the rest of the videos in our series.